Marketing 2020 CMO panel.
So I guess no tennis, huh? No golf. Wow. We're honored that you decided to stay with us. We're actually pretty confident that we're going to give you something to discuss at your tables when we're done and in the ensuing hours tonight and tomorrow as well. But before we continue and we look at the other part of Marketing 2020, Organizing for Growth, I want to give some credit where it's due to the invisible team, and it's a huge invisible team that actually was the engine behind all the analysis of Marketing 2020. Not only within EffectiveBrands, there were people in 5 offices around the world chunking away at their practice to see what's there, but also we held CMO roundtables with quite a lot of you in about 10 places around the world when we had only a sprinkling of the findings with CMOs to say, what's here and where do we need to prod deeper and what should the analysis focus on? And then we actually had a groundswell of CMOs that were in between jobs. And I think 5 or 6 literally contributed their time in analyzing some of the core interviews. So a lot of people worked to make this happen, besides all the organizations that you see on the slides. Now, just before lunch, I think sort of the starting point is that the what of marketing is changing significantly, what we do, but that actually the organization has not. That's what we're going to zoom into now. That was the focus of Marketing 2020. What's the role of marketing as we discuss it with our peers? Who does this? Who is actually going to run digital? Who does e-commerce? Is it sales or is it marketing? And once we know our role, how do we structure for it? And how do we build the capability for ourselves, but more importantly for our teams? To get this right, to get people the sense that they are equipped for growth. And how do I lead it? Which is really the focus of this session as well. So, I want to just quickly take a step back and say, okay, before lunch we talked about those characteristics and how you build brand value. Now I want to talk about the other part of the picture, the connecting in the organization, the inspiring all the key stakeholders inside and out, the getting focus when there's so much we could be doing to say, but these are the 3 key programs, and then who does what and how do we learn as we move forward. Some key findings along the way. The most important, if you were to walk away with one, is that it's about connections. It's about recognizing that if we're going to go to these integrated solutions that straddle the silos, marketing is far too important to be left just to the marketers. Now, our role as marketers is to make that clear to everyone else in the organization, because otherwise we will not have those seamless solutions that we're getting used to from other providers, but we as a company don't yet provide. At least that's what people play back. Now that requires influence, and this is the first piece of very good news. This survey was done in a smaller form 7 years ago, and the question was asked, to what extent does marketing work closely with the CEO on strategy? At the time, it was only 38%. That's gone up in 7 years to 58%. So marketers are being listened to much better. To what extent does marketing approve big investments? Again, a significant increase. So people are not just feeling good about this, they're actually being listened to more than before. What you see is the most successful organizations, there's a partnership for growth. Just look at Keith Weed, who is actually the chairperson of this study too, but the way he and Paul Polman work in tandem shows that marketing is the driving engine behind the growth strategy of Unilever. Look at Beth, who was here yesterday, and how she talks about and how others talk about her partnership with Jeff Immels. There's a partnership for growth there. Stephen Quinn. I think all of us were impressed with the enormous level of activities and fundamental changes in Walmart. You don't get those done unless you're like this with the CEO. And Nike, the example of the Fuel Band only was possible when after 2 years of doing Nike ID, that predecessor that they had, the CEO said, I buy it. We're a service company. Let's do it. Let's restructure. Partnerships for growth. And that influence is very high in some industries, like CPG, about 65%, but it isn't in all industries. There are real catch-up industries, like healthcare and energy, where only 34% of people say, yeah, we consider marketing to be the strategic partner. Big opportunities for growth. But it starts with demonstrating business acumen. If you're the marketer that's all about brand health and then everything else follows from that, you're in a tough spot because your peers are not listening. If you want influence, you need to first demonstrate business acumen. It's the license to then be able to influence. And that's what's been happening over this last decade. These Spencer Stuart numbers clearly show not only that CMOs are being listened to, but that people want them on the team for longer. That would only be true for strategic partners for growth. Now, if that's about connecting, the next aspect is about inspiration. And the key message here that I'd like to share is engineer less, engage more. Yes, all those product iterations and relaunches and so forth are important, but actually we don't engage enough with our internal audience so that they get what our purpose is. They get what we're trying to do for our consumers. I mentioned that paint example just before the break. These are people that work for that paint company. Over 80% of their employees have actually engaged in these projects and felt what it was like to make a difference in the community. Words could never reach that. And engagement internally turns out to be a huge growth driver. Look at these 3 data points. It's about, am I proud of our purpose? 2, are we engaging with our own employees around purpose? And are we engaging with our customers and consumers around brand purpose? Huge differences between the companies that do it and that don't. Remember that every orange bar you see are overperformers in business growth, validated with external published numbers. Now, this is not some softy thing that you can't measure. It's very measurable. Google actually measures your Googliness. It's 1/4 of your appraisal. Are you living the culture of Google? Do you embody our purpose? Unilever says, before you're even allowed into our company, we're going to take you away for a week and immerse you in sustainable living strategy. Their corporate purpose. You don't get to start before you've done that. And then every year in your PDP, they actually go back and say, what are you doing? Making it personal. And Zappos, I think, has the best example. I hope they still do this after the takeover by Amazon. But they literally send you a letter after 6 months and say, would you like to leave? We're offering you $2,000 to leave. Their thinking is, if you prefer the money, they don't want you there. How many of us have actually engaged to that level and thought about the people that we have around us and say, are these the people we want to deliver our value? To be us. But then it takes focus. And Jim, you said it so nicely. This is not the enemy of connections. Focus drives results. Knowing the strategy drives overperformance. It's scarily true that our colleagues don't know what their strategy is. Look at this for a minute. The top left is global and the most senior person. The bottom right is the most junior person in the company and a local operating company. And the question is, I support the strategy. Look how linear the decrease is as people get further away from the center of power. It's about communication. We know this when we talk outside, but somehow we don't do it when it's about the people that actually need to deliver it. So then, how do we do this orchestration, this integration internally, which turns out to be so important? Well, it starts with just having a frank conversation with your CEO and your peers to say, what is the role of marketing? Because if there's a founder like Steve Jobs, or here, Mr. Wang of Alibaba in China, who's doing that, great. The CEO should be the one doing it. But there so often isn't a founder anymore. And there's a CFO that became CEO and does all the business side great, but perhaps isn't the natural collection point for what is our purpose. So if it's marketing, let's get that clear and get permission to play that role. You might not be in charge, but maybe you take that experience perspective and collaborate more with your peers. Every one of these shows that CMOs that work closely with IT, with HR, and with finance overperform. These numbers speak clearly. Now, a great example is at Motorola, where the CMO actually now is in charge of IT. Can you believe that? Or someone that we have right here, and we're going to be talking about that, a CMO that actually took the role of HR for a while, and now also has corporate comms and CSR and a lot of other things rolled in there. This organization is going to evolve to a much more networked entity, where really people have to work together, not with detailed playbooks about who does what, but much more around what is the customer solution we've promised, what is our purpose, and how do we get it done. When you look in the great companies like Nike and Red Bull, they don't actually have very detailed playbooks around roles. What you do see is that there's some new corners of expertise being created. The data analytics are hugely important. What does that data say so that it becomes an insight? So that we can adapt our offering to an individual or to a segment which suddenly turns out to be interesting enough to serve on its own. But then the new role that you see is this type of community manager. A marketer that feels, that represents, and that interacts with the community on behalf of our company, and represents that community inside the company. And then there's this whole new area of content. Content which we can't afford no longer to have done by an agency that needs a brief and comes back 2 weeks later, and I know that that's not true for so many agencies today. But sadly, it's true for some others. What you see is that there is a huge rise in companies saying, no, content creation, we need to do that ourselves, because it isn't just about leveraging assets. If that's how you think about it, you missed the boat. It's about building experiences, and those assets, whether they're information or videos, they are part of the solution. You wouldn't delegate that to someone else. So a recent A&A report actually showed that from 38% an increase to 58% in terms of companies that now use their creative services in-house. It's very big. And it's only getting more complicated. The number of agencies you work with turns out to be a discriminator for growth. Overperforming companies work significantly more with 5 agencies or more, and it's only getting more. And no, if you're a small company, you don't have to work with fewer agencies, because it's about the expertise that these agencies represent. And that is exploding with all the different touch points. And also this whole concept of global-local. Joe Tripodi said it so nicely. They're moving away from global, regional, local to global networked organizations. Let's see who's best at Christmas. Did you know that the German Coke team organizes the promotions for Coke worldwide for Christmas? They turned out to be really good at it. So Germany is now Christmas country. Seriously. And what we found is that segments, Axe is a great example. Unilever has an innovation center focused on horny teenagers. Turns out they're pretty much the same, depending on whether they live in Shanghai, London, or Paris. The fact that they're Chinese horny teenagers is far less relevant than the fact that they actually cut across segments. So maybe it's less about local and it's more about communities that have representation and warrant their own mix. And finally, this build driver. Because the craft of marketing is only turning out to be more important. Look at these numbers. The overperforming companies on every basic metric of the 101 of marketing say they're better. They know it about themselves, and underperformers know it about themselves that they're not good at it. Talk about an argument for spending on marketing training. It is the #1 driver of growth across all the points we measured. Are you investing in the growth of your team? The number of companies that train more than 3 days and up heavily outperform the number of companies that do 2 days of training or less. But it's no longer about doing sort of shots across specialists. It's no longer about learning how to do digital marketing. It's about marketing in a digital age. How do we integrate and bring it together? And finally, how do you lead this? Because I like this example. This is Diageo. it isn't just about marketing that needs to be trained. Diageo has taken, over the last 3 years, 1,000 of its senior leaders to Facebook to be trained, to be immersed in the experience of the business model is being challenged. And they sit there as boards together and say, how is this going to impact us? And the AB InBev people, the board of AB InBev, was using Foursquare and leading by example to show to the rest of the company, we should be trying this because this is rewriting how people think about going out and drinking. So yes, it is about the what of the brand, but just as important, it's about the how of the brand. How do you connect, inspire, focus the organization, create clarity around those roles, and evolve those roles, and then iterate and learn. That's the framework. So with that, I want to set up the Organizing for Growth discussion, which is going to be led by Greg Wells. As I said, I don't think there's a person in this room that knows more marketeers in the US, has placed more senior marketeers in the US, and actually, I know him because over the last few years, he's built a real IP collection with a book also 3 years ago already around how purpose is just good business sense. Greg, over to you.